Schools across the developed world have never invested so much time, money, and energy in supporting the mental health and well-being of young people. So you'd think that young people today had never been happier, right? Wrong. Mission Australia has found that 1 in 6 primary school children and 1 in 4 high school children are suffering from distress. That's 1/4 of our adolescents who are struggling. I wonder how many of us know a child who is overwhelmed, disengaged, unhappy. Maybe that child was you. When I was at school, it was very much a time filled with hard work and exams. I'm naturally academic, very perfectionist, and I was driven to succeed. In addition to Latin verbs and the periodic table, I learnt very early on, at a very deep level, that life is a competition, that success is about winning, and that winning is a judgment made by somebody else when they give you a grade or an award or a sticker. Winning is a judgment made by somebody else. So, I learnt to keep my eyes firmly on the prize, and over time, this came at a great cost to my own well-being. When I was 14, I was starting to crumble at the constant pressure to win. Art was no longer considered to be a viable subject in the pursuit of excellence, and so despite an absolute love of painting, I stopped. I squashed my creative voice. I became socially withdrawn and unhappy. This led to a lot of social rejection over time, to the point where I was completely isolated. In my last 2 years of school, I lost all of the friends that I'd had since I was 8 years old. I can't tell you how utterly lonely I felt every single day. I remember being asked to write an essay in an exam called The Emergence of the Chip in Modern Society. I think that the examiners were looking for something about microtechnology and the arrival of home computers in English households. This was, after all, 1984. But in an attempt to find a little bit of my own creative voice and push just a little bit against the system, I decided to write about the arrival of McDonald's in England and the emergence of French fries in English society. I got a really low mark. When I left school, I fell into a real black hole for several years and found myself in this constant state of free-floating anxiety. I became a hippie. I dyed my hair purple. I listened to a lot of Neil Young. And I campaigned for gay rights, for animal rights, for women's rights. If you felt like you were an outsider and you also didn't belong, then I was your advocate. I also spent a lot of time in the pursuit of my own well-being, which was so severely lacking. I studied psychology at university. I became a practicing Buddhist, and I read incessantly. But it wasn't until I reached my mid-20s that I came to truly understand that the pursuit of well-being is in itself a problem. Because happiness is not a goal to be achieved. A meaningful life is not a competition. But rather, well-being emerges when we feel alive. And feeling alive is about feeling connected. Connected to the people who matter to us. Connected to the things that we do and the norms of our community. Connected to our sense of physical place in the world. So well-being is about connection. And it's very hard to be connected when you spend all of your time looking for recognition or pursuing some sort of future goal. 20 years ago, I finished my PhD and I was offered a job in Queensland, which I eagerly accepted. I had this vision of drinking cocktails on this tropical beach and some sort of slightly bronzed, permanent sun-kissed look. Reality was a bit different. I felt out of place and very sort of uncertain in this country that I didn't really know or understand. I was also surprised at how completely homesick I felt for the England that I'd left behind so readily. I can remember in my second week in Australia, my new head of school invited me along to a barbecue, and he asked me to bring along a plate. So I took along a plate. Of course, now I know he meant a plate of food. But it takes time. It takes time to understand the context in which you're in. And it takes time to connect to that context. But the more connected we become, the more alive we become. And I call this contextual well-being. So contextual well-being is the well-being that emerges when we feel connected to the people around us, connected to the things that we do and the norms of our communities, connected to our sense of place in the world. Contextual well-being is so vitally important in life that if we're lucky enough to live past the age of 80, then the number of years we continue to live is more dependent on our contextual well-being, our connection to community, than to any other factor. And that includes diet, smoking, and drinking, which actually bodes very well for your 80th birthday party. But what about young people? Well, children do not become resilient because we continually force them to compete. They become resilient when they feel connected, when they're contextually well, when they're connected to their family, to their classroom, to their school, so that when something goes wrong, they still have a strong sense of their place in the world. Children do not do well academically because of natural ability only or effort. They also need to be contextually well, because when we feel connected, we have a sense of belonging. And that means we have so much more capacity to learn. Yet still, schools perpetuate this competitive, reward-driven reality for young people. And this unhealthy reality is now spilling over into the way we try and support well-being. So I've seen schools who want young people to learn about kindness, but they hand kids prizes when they see them being kind to other children. This is making well-being into a competition. And suddenly, being kind only matters when someone is watching. Far better to show young people what being kind looks like in action. To let them know that being kind is an expectation in their communities. And then to help them to feel connected to those communities so that they organically and naturally internalize being kind. I see many schools today who want young people to understand and recognize and build on their strengths. But they do this by asking children to list their strengths in a hierarchy from top to bottom. As if you could get B+ for bravery, but only D- for zest. Far better to help young children to understand a mix of different strengths in different situations without judgment and without ranking. Now, I know that there are children out there who do really well in the school system just as it is. They do well academically, and they make good friends along the way. Maybe you were one of them. And it's very easy for the people who are feeling successful to look at the children who are struggling or misbehaving and say, well, they need to try harder. They need to be more motivated. They need to get some help, as if they are the problem. But maybe they are simply trying to survive in a system that insists on having winners and therefore losers, and that is not okay. Children know the difference between a wellbeing program and the competitive reality of their lives. I still fear social rejection, and I can be quite reserved and shy at times. But I also feel so much more alive. I have more contextual well-being. I make sure I prioritize time with my family and close friends. I have found my creative voice, and I paint each week, and I love it. Here in Australia, I found myself a gorgeous partner, and together we have 3 very beautiful girls. One is now 11. She is highly creative, and she's also very perfectionist. One is now 15. She's amazingly socially skilled, and she's dyslexic. One is now 9 years old, and she's pretty cruisy. I hope that each of them leaves school having done their best academically. But far more importantly, I hope that each of my children, and indeed every single child, leaves school contextually well, feeling connected to the people around them, connected to their learning and to the things that they do, feeling confident in who they are becoming. Schools need to realize that success is not about finding some way to stand out from the crowd above the others. True success is about finding a way into the crowd. Thank you.